first word I wanted officially on
You
the
picked that one
podcast.
specifically?
I was like, my very first word ever on a podcast, what will it be? And that was the winner.
That's interesting. You're the radio guy. How'd you lead into shows before?
Oh boy. I just kind of had kind of like a voice where you just like get into a little bit of a trance and you just kind of give an intro of yourself. And you always had to start with the tagline of the radio station. And then from there it was like you would read ads, or you would read like the last two songs were this, the next two songs were that.
Yeah. See, and the reason I asked that question is like the first 30 seconds is just find the groove and start talking.
Yeah.
And we've already accomplished that.
Well, I've got my lead off question here, if we want to call it that. For
All right,
you.
let's go fire away.
It's super open. So it's basically, we decided just a couple of days ago that we were going to sit down and do this. And my question is, in between that time of deciding, picking a time, setting up, what has been going through your mind of like, what do I want to talk about? Or like when you're thinking about this moment right now of like when recording, what have you been mentally preparing for?
Okay, so I have a specific question, but I think I want to push that later.
Okay.
And start with like, why are we doing this? And I just answered your question with a question, but like, so the things that I want to talk about are the things that we talk about on our own, really, but just in a more broad sort of sense. So the topics, like if I were to bullet point them out, would be like religion, politics, current events, but I also want to make sure that we have splashes of like comedy and sort of ourselves shining through all of it. I guess that would be like the Cliff Notes version.
Yeah, so you've just been kind of thinking about macro, where do you want to take this and what do you want to touch on?
Yeah, and I have more specific questions, but like I said, let's maybe punt those for now.
I just wanted to like, what has been popping in your mind when you're thinking about sitting in front of a microphone? Really...
So it's been those topics, which is why, like when I was coming up with names and I said the forbidden dinner table, it's like, okay, dinner table topics that you're not supposed to talk about, right? Which is typically religion, politics, those types of things.
Yeah. It's funny, I was also kind of rattling around some names, and one of them that came up for me was like the wedding table, where if you think about like, or table 9 is one I thought of too, of like when you're putting together a wedding list and you put everybody you don't sort of know or your rejects on one table, like what does that table talk about?
You know what's really funny is when you said table 9 initially, the first thing that popped into my head was the line from Wedding Singer, the mutants over at table 9.
Pretty much. That's what the calling card of this podcast is, how I kind of was thinking about it.
So we're in the same like vein. My only like issue with that particular name is that doesn't draw you in, I think, as much as something that's like forbidden.
Well, I will say too, there's already
feedback as well.
There's already a podcast I think called like The Table 9, and another podcast I was interested in. I was like From A to Z with a play on our names. There's already a podcast for that too. So we're late to the game, Al. We discovered podcasting very late.
You should check this podcasting out. That's like YMH is like, hey, have you guys heard of this show Game of Thrones? It's pretty good. That's us right
they
now
dropped all seasons at once. That's insane.
Yeah, so I mean, we can keep spitballing on the name. I personally still like the Forbidden Dinner Table. It's a bit long, and I do agree, but I also think the word forbidden is like, that raises an eyebrow. Whereas table 9 doesn't like tell you exactly what it's going to be, but we can punt that too.
Sure.
So the other thing too, by the way, what I think we should do is record like a few of these, see if something just pops up. But like, I think what I'm saying is, let's not like finish this and post it. Let's like record like 5, and then we can be like, here's our first 5 episodes.
I like that. And maybe a name pops out through the first 5 or something like that.
Yeah, right. Something sort of organically comes up, or it gives us time to think of something better. Plus, like, if we put it on Spotify, we're going to want like a cover art or something, so we can kind of throw that stuff together too.
That's all you, man. You've got the great skills from
I'm
your
sure
album arts that you've made in the past.
Yeah.
So this is a little bit too of what I've been thinking about over just the past few days of like, okay, if I'm going to sit down and do a podcast, I've spent a lot of a lot less time thinking about topics and more time thinking about podcast ethics and like the rules of a road for a podcast. So things like authenticity, things like I'm not bringing up people in my life and trying to like pitch
I agree
their
with that.
views, right? And sort of be like, well, this person told me all of this stuff, and like painting my image of them, like all of a sudden getting documented forever, right, digitally, and then being like, if I showed it to them, they'd be like, well, that's not exactly what I meant. So I want to be very careful of like not name dropping or specifically saying people in my life like this is their views or I got it from them. I want to like kind of pay respect, but not also completely tie it to them, because this decision we made to document ourselves and our views is one that we decided is good and we want to green light, but other people may not have that view.
I think
and
that's
so
fair.
I've been thinking about that.
Like
too.
if anything, they should come on and talk about it. We shouldn't put words in
Yes.
people's mouths, nor should we say anything where someone listening would be like, oh, they're talking about me. Unless it's like our parents maybe, but other than that, yeah, I don't want to like single people out. Funny too that you bring some of this like ethic type stuff. Being authentic, I guess, was your first bullet point there. Kirsten was telling me, but I can tell stories, I guess. But she was saying, yeah, she should listen to it and give like an outsider's perspective on how we could appeal to more people. And I was like, yes, let's just sell out episode 1, whatever the masses want. That's what we're gonna give. That's like episode 1. We've already sold out. We're gonna collaborate with Taylor Swift.
Episode 1 is going to be completely about TikTok.
But that's good, and I think that's important too, like ethics, sort of like you were saying, to lay this all out. What do you want to do about swearing?
Oh, I didn't think that far ahead. You know, I have a version, like a track in my mind that I put on where I'm pretty good at not swearing because I've worked with kids, and so I had to like train myself not to swear. So depending on how you want to do it, like I would be pretty good, I think, at not swearing. Should we do it like the PG-13 movies where you get to drop one F-bomb per podcast?
We've got rules. I don't know. I feel like if I'm being authentic, it's just whatever comes out, I guess. Yeah.
That's fair.
Although, well, I don't know. Yeah, maybe we come back to that and just see how things are being received.
You got a bunch of toddlers you want to show this to?
We'll see what all 6 of our listeners have to say.
The only other thing too, when thinking about like good rules of the road for podcasting, is if one of us uses a term that the other one doesn't understand, or we start kind of getting into our own speak, we should try and catch each other and be like, whoa, define that.
100%.
Like,
that got brought up earlier today too with Kirsten, actually. I totally agree, because I think you and I have a like sort of a record of going back and forth very quickly. We know what each other's talking about, but we need to be like, wait, define that quickly, or whatever you're saying. Yeah.
Where did that come from?
Yeah, these are all really good and things I've thought about too, so that's good. How long do you want to go?
I would err on the side of shorter, right? I've thought a little bit about this, of like, you know, podcasting and kind of, you know, the long form interview that like Joe Rogan does, but also I guess there's an audience already built there where they will set up for like a 3-hour conversation, where I don't think we should do that. I think ours should be a little bit tighter, especially in the beginning, like err on the side of short. Yeah.
So there is a timer so we could keep track. I was thinking like 45 minutes to an hour tops.
Yeah. And well, here's another good question then too. Do we let it go pure raw audio, or do we edit things out?
I would say mostly pure audio, unless there's like a reason to edit something out. We have to be like, hey, that part didn't come across right, or like actually what I said was wrong, let's take that out. But outside of that, it should be everything that gets said.
Yeah, I think I can get on board with that, and if we find a situation where we both hard vote to edit, we can do that and then disclaim it.
I mean, we might hit a point where we finish an episode and we're like, trash that whole thing because I don't know, it gets off the rails or whatever, but it happens.
I've just kind of thinking about influencers in my life and people who have done podcasts. It's been interesting to hear. So Joe Rogan talks about how, he live streams his basically, and he's like, there's no do backs. Like you can't go back. It's all there. And he's like, that's very freeing in a way. And then when he talks to Sam Harris and Sam Harris's podcast, Making Sense, he talks about he needs the edit button because that allows him to be more free in case he's like, what? I'm touching on something sensitive, and if I didn't get it quite right, we can do that again. So it was interesting to hear two different takes on that.
Yeah, I guess I would sort of go along with Sam Harris there, of where like I can be a little more, I was going to say loosey-goosey, but that might not be the right term. But like, I can talk more in my mind, knowing that if I jumble the words and it doesn't come across, I can be like, you know what? Let's just start that part over. Versus being very, like if it was live, I feel like I'd be a little bit more in a box, like a little bit more cautious, and I don't think I like that. I don't know. We could cross live shows that bridge way down the road. I can't even see it. It's so far down the road.
Yeah, I think this is technically anytime we get together for family dinners, we're doing a live show.
That's true, actually. Yeah, that'll be our audience anyway. So
yeah,
we should sell tickets to family dinners. She's like, Mom, I know you're cooking, but it's going to cost you $10 to listen to us.
There's going to be a surcharge on Thanksgiving this year.
Yeah. Okay, so any that's one thing too, by the way, and I know that I just said it, but like cutting down on verbal pauses and things is something I'm going to try to be really conscious of, because that just is like twisting a knife in a listener's ears usually.
Just a period of no one talking?
No, that's okay. It's when you sit there and go, that's just like awful. It's better that it's just like quiet for a second.
Take a minute, collect your thoughts.
Yeah, a little bit of quiet time. Little Craig Ferguson.
Nice.
Any all right, so that's good. Anything to add to that? I think these are good like ground rules, and we're clearly on the same page, so I don't think anything was a shock or is going to be all that hard.
No, I think that sounds good, and anything else we'll kind of figure it out as we go.
Okay, cool. Yeah, that sounds good. So any specific questions or anything, like topics that you have brought to episode 1 here? This is really like episode 0, but...
Episode 0. Yeah, I have one that I mentioned last time I saw you in person, actually. It was just kind of a comment, and we didn't have a chance to unpack it, so I thought it'd be good to circle back and sort of give the comment again. It's about the Metaverse, basically. Facebook now Metaverse, their kind of 5-year plan for creating this physical internet kind of is the way that I think about it. And I mean, you can go in so many different directions off of that, but one interesting thought that I had is if we fast forward, let's assume the Metaverse rolls out over the next 5 years and we have this ability to put on a headset and go somewhere and sort of meet with friends and collaborate in this physical digital space. Is that going to give rise to a new look on consciousness where basically people are going to get so used to kind of taking this headset off or unplugging and returning to what I call sort of the natural life, that there's going to be this increase in the belief of an afterlife, or the increase that we're in a simulation, because people are going to think that death is basically just like taking the headset off.
Wow, that was quite a swing for question number 1.
That is literally the only question I have, so I thought I'd just pack it all into one.
Let me start by saying I hate that Facebook has co-opted the word meta, because here we are doing a podcast about podcasts for the last 15 minutes, and I want to be like so meta, but it like, yeah, that's so like Facebook's new company. It's like, no, that's I just don't even want to say it anymore.
Oh, Facebook doesn't get to own the block on Meta.
Well, the ticker has started then, because like as kids grow up, they'll just be like, "Oh, Meta, like that company," and it's true. Like, no, that's not what it meant. Okay. Anyways, to get to your question though, are we jumbling up like what's real and not real? I think the answer is yeah. I mean, I don't know. It's interesting that you bring death into it, because people thought that this would happen with video games, and I'm not really sure that it has. I think it has confused the brain a little bit, because historically, one of the few things that your brain could never possibly fathom is dying, but we see it all the time now in like movies and video games and stuff, and you sort of get an extra life, or you get reborn or whatever, and so like I think that maybe has wiggled its way in, but I'm not sure that it has like truly affected the finality thinking of death.
So you think there will still be this catch sort of in your mind, in your kind of mental framework that says that's different?
Yeah, well, so I'm just sort of playing it out in my brain, which is a pre-metaverse brain, so that's going to be something to sort of keep in mind. And I would say like the problem that I have is I still know that death would prevent me from like going back into the metaverse. So I wouldn't want to do that.
So there's this kind of idea that it's the true end. I'm going to put that in air quotes because we don't really know, but like the idea that is the end of the line.
Yeah, because
can I ask?
Go ahead.
This is a little bit of a divergent, but it touches the same topic. How often do you think about death? Once a day, multiple times a day, once a month?
I mean, not even once a day, really. I think more about time than I do about death, but that I don't really think of the ending of that thought process around time.
I see. I would catalog it as I probably think about death once a day. So there was a poll recently. There's a poll recently, and I don't remember the numbers off the top of my head, so this is going to be a very lackluster comment, but it asked people to vote how often do you think about death, multiple times a day, once a week, once a month, like kind of once a quarter.
Okay.
And it was a little bit all over the place, and it's that kind of that moment like, wait, you guys all don't think the same like I do, right? So you think, oh, we're all in the same group, right? Like most people think like I do. And then you see the spread and you're like, oh, never mind. Like people think about this topic very differently. And so I was just surprised, like, oh, I thought people thought about death more frequently because I sort of think about it.
Once a day feels high for me, but I could be totally wrong and just like it's in and out quickly. And so it doesn't even necessarily register. Let's expand on this a little bit then. So what aspects of death? Is it like how it happens or is it what happens next?
Well, I guess a little bit all around it. So not like the physical moment, but I think about sort of like the moments leading up to death. Will I look back and say, like, this is a life well spent? Will I have regrets? At the moments that I'm dying, like, I have a feeling that it's not going to be painful, right? That there's chemicals in the brain that sort of ease your transition. And then is it like going to sleep? Like, I guess I think about sort of like the moments right before and the reflection on your life. And I use that as a tool sometimes in decision making of like, when I'm towards the end of my life, will I look back at this as a good decision or a poor decision? And then I sort of think about the moments of it happening. And then I think about what is it like afterwards? And we don't know. I've read a chunk of near-death experience stories that are kind of all over the board, but my personal belief is that it is kind of like it's projecting to what it was like before you were born, which is nothing.
Well, yeah, so there's a couple things going on here. So I think when people sort of combine the words like dying and suffering, which I think need to be very distinctly different, because especially if you're saying like going to sleep, whatever, I don't have I don't fear dying, but I do fear dying in a very like painful, suffering manner. But it's not because of the death aspect, like it's because of that part. So I think when people say they're afraid of death, it might be more like, well, they're afraid of, bleeding out on the street. And it's like, yeah, totally. But if you were just in bed around like loved ones, it wouldn't be that scary.
So you're kind of saying people are afraid of the act of dying?
Well, yeah, and part of that is just because it's unknown. Like we don't know how it's going to happen, and some people, die like gruesomely, and others very pleasantly. And so we all kind of hope for the one, but that's not always the case. And I think that's the part that people are afraid of. And well, I don't want to put words in anybody else's mouth, but for me, it's that and not the actual like I've moved on and what's next. That's not scary to me. Not that I have an answer of what happens, but
It's funny because mine's a little bit of the inverse. To me, I feel like if you're dying, unless you're like it's over a span of days, I mean that would be awful. But like that's going to come to an end, right? I mean that's going to be a blip, and then most of the time is not the act of dying, but the fact that you're not around.
Yeah, but if I'm ever like in a situation where I'm wishing I was just dead, that sounds terrible.
Yeah, I mean that colors your own life and view in a unique way.
I will say, so you brought up like near-death experiences and things, which I've seen some videos on and things, read about. There do seem to be some commonalities between many of them, which I do find very interesting. They don't necessarily point to like religion per se. Well, usually what they do is sort of plaster their religious belief on the experience. But the experience itself, if you sort of strip that back, from what I've read and heard, there are some common themes, which I do think is very interesting.
And to me, you can take that as sort of an objective fact about the afterlife potentially, or we all have a brain and it has a similar process of shutting down.
Yeah, and so whatever you believe is going to happen at that moment, your brain's going to try to make the connections as it's turning off. Maybe. I mean, obviously we don't know, but...
Well, yeah, it's kind of funny. I'll take that example and maybe take it a step up and a little bit lighter. I think about, let's say you've got a group of folks who are on a plane, right? And you could have somebody who was raised in a Muslim culture, somebody who was raised in a Catholic culture, a Christian culture, somebody who wasn't raised at all, somebody who was raised in a Hindu culture. And even if they all claim to be atheists, the moment the plane stops dropping out of the sky, they're all going to have this question of like, what if? But they're all going to think very different what ifs. Like they're going to go to that spot that they kind of have spent their life either ignoring or combating, right? If they sort of don't believe. But it's weird that as that plane is kind of falling out of the sky, and then we'll make it a happy story. The engine kicks in and it flies off into the sunset. But like all of them are going to have this moment where they think about something completely different in their mind as to like what they've potentially could be avoiding.
Do you mean like, oh, okay, so the next part, or do you mean like regrets in their life, which would also be very
I don't
different?
mean regrets. I mean, they sort of like, I would imagine in their mind, they're like, well, maybe I was wrong. Like maybe I was wrong about X, right? And the Muslim's going to be like, maybe I was wrong about Allah. The Catholic or Christian's going to be like, maybe I was wrong about Jesus, right? And then the Hindu may say, like, maybe I was wrong about Vishnu, right? This like, they're going to have this like weird come to faith moment, I'm going to call it, but they're all thinking about a different thing because it was just part of their culture upbringing. It'd be curious to know somebody who's raised completely secular. Maybe they would just have maybe there's more moment. But
because I would almost think the opposite, actually, in that one person would be like, oh, I'm about to go meet Jesus, and the other person's like, oh, I'm about to go meet Allah and Muhammad, and they might like both look at each other and be like, what did you just say? Which I think is very interesting.
I'm not sure what the amount of chatter is among the passengers as the plane falls out of the sky. But I just think about where you're in a moment of dying. I would imagine your brain goes to sort of your upbringing, right? And it's a fascinating thought to me that all of these people sort of go to their cornerstones and a lot of people's cornerstones culturally are different.
Yeah, I think maybe we're saying quite the same thing. Now I'm picturing two people on an airplane, and as they're falling, the other one's leaning over and be like, let me spoil the end of that movie for you because you're never going to get to finish it. Yeah, well, but yeah, I see what you're saying. They can be so different. And this is where you and I talk a lot about of like what's right and wrong. And it's so interesting that you can ask two different people and get completely different answers. Right. Like the Jewish person might be like, oh, I shouldn't have eaten all that pork.
Right.
And
exactly.
And the Christian is like, what? Like that doesn't mean anything at all. And then, the Muslim might say something completely different. Like, oh, I forgot to pray that one time during the day or whatever. I'm not as up on Muslim as I am the other ones, but
I didn't fast during Ramadan.
Yeah, something like that. Right. And again, the other two would look at them like, what are you talking about? And it's so
right.
It'd be really interesting to get all three religions in a room and like talk to each other about it. But it'd have to be, see, and this is where you and I always dig in. If someone says, oh, we can't eat pork, the next question has to be why, and there has to be a decent answer. That's fine if that's your rules or whatever, but if they just say God told me so, then it's like, well, okay.
Well, you and I take a very kind of scientific, logical kind of based approach, but I think the question here, at least something that I've been working through, is like, is there a domain where science ends and then you need something else? Because if I can expand on this a little bit further, and I could talk about this for a while, but I'm just going to keep it short. There's kind of like, I've been thinking how no matter what your belief system is, down to the kind of core foundation of it, there's a point where you have to introduce faith, or you sort of have to make a jump. Like, even if you live a completely scientific approach, right, there's this idea of, right now, with the information that we have, it's sort of like, okay, well, the universe was created 14 billion years ago or something like that. But then when you sort of say, like, well, why are these natural laws like gravity and the core pieces of physics there's kind of a shoulder shrug. And like, that's, I think, the moment of faith outside of religion that I've realized that I've kind of just taken that as is. But when I have conversations with more religious people, they point to that a lot and they go, oh man, like, kudos to you. Like, I wouldn't have enough faith to believe in that.
Do you think that line is fixed, or is that a moving target?
Well, I think it's a moving piece as science discovers more things. But is there sort of a point where the domain of science ends and you need something else to then get information about our universe or humanity?
Well, but I don't know that... So I understand what you're saying. There's a line where science ends, but if that line's always moving, I don't know that I would call it faith. It's just like, we don't know that part yet. And I think it being an unknown is okay too.
That's the camp that I'm in, right, currently, as like, hey, jump on board the teams that are trying to figure this out, right? And like this is the best sort of toolkit that we have. But is there things that are outside of that toolkit that are you have to get to those discoveries using not the scientific method?
So I'm going to maybe take this down a little bit of a different road, but we just had this text conversation last night of, that's fine, but even if you're faithful or religious, you should be working towards answers to those questions. The problem I have is when people go, that's just God's thing, we'll never understand it. And my thought is like, well, we should try. Like, why would you not even try to scientifically explain it? It sounds like you're just copping out of the whole thing, and I don't like that.
Yeah, but there's, I would imagine the idea there then is, there's so many different versions of faith and sects that, like, you can sort of name your thing here, and there's probably a group of people that believe it, right? Of like, it's all created, and it's our task as humanity to then discover it.
That's true. I wonder, I would have to ask a more religious person, like, are you upset when science almost disproves like religious beliefs, or like what happens and what is that experience like? Yeah, well,
I believe it's Sam Harris that has an interesting comment where he says there's been a lot of things that have moved from the camp of religion explaining into the camp of science can now explain it. And his task or question is, can you name one thing that science has explained, but then religion actually explains better, right? Like, it's gone the other way. And I have never heard an example of that. I would welcome it. I think it would make for an interesting conversation. But is there anything that has moved from science can explain this to now religion can explain this?
Not logically. I mean, the thing that popped into my head is if there's like some sort of parable that better illustrates a point, but that's not, I don't think that's what he's saying.
Yeah, and I think the two domains work so differently, and this is my own personal interpretation, where science and the scientific method never proves anything true. It just proves things false, and then when you have enough collection of experiments, you can say, okay, this is this seems
yeah,
true,
yeah.
right? We're going to treat this as true, versus religion as a domain seems more of like, this is a truth that they put out there. And part of my own personal struggle with that is when there are claims that are non-falsifiable. Like the idea that prayer works is something that I struggle with, because if you say, I'm really praying for this job, and then you don't get the job, is it like, well, is that an example of prayer not working? And I've heard a lot of people say, like, no, it's just sort of God's plan. And it's like, okay, well, it doesn't really matter what the outcome is. You're still going to have this hypothesis. You have no way to actually test it.
Well, that's like two
it.
sports teams praying before they play each other. And it's like, well, you can't both win. So should one stop because it didn't work? Or, I think that's sort of another example. I was trying to think, when you were here, we got into this a little bit, and I don't remember the exact example about how someone could like do something to better themselves and the other person could just pray about it, and then one would have a much more measurable result, and the other one like, did it work or not? It'd be like on them to explain it, which isn't great.
Yeah, well, measurability is an interesting thing. I think about how science, you really get the benefit of kind of standing on the shoulders of the person before you, or you can build on the work of the person before you. There's a quote, I can't remember now, of like standing on the shoulders of the giants to get to the next kind of level of science. Where religion, you can kind of do that because you can read other people's conversions or paths or stories of the personal, kind of faith and those things. But it's such a personal journey. You almost are always starting at square one. Where science has the benefit of kind of climbing a ladder.
That's true.
That is less personal in a regard.
I would like to see religions do that within their own stories, though, like, because we got to where we are through storytelling and things being passed down, and then once they got written down, it's like they froze, right?
Yeah.
So we should be encouraging. I don't want to say forget about all that stuff, tradition and all that. I think that's important in religion, but we should almost be encouraging like new parables that are much more relatable. Like, you should open up the Bible and read a story about a kid and his cell phone or whatever. You know what I'm saying? Something like that becomes much more relatable. But it's the same story. It's the same point. I think that would be good. I think that would go a long way. And that's sort of what you're saying of like using the ones before you to keep paving the road forward. And I guess that's my first take on how like religion could do that in a way and just keep it being more and more relatable, but never really losing like the moral of the story.
Well, let me ask you a question sort of around religion and sort of that, if there's kind of two paths here. One is sort of updating it like you're talking about. I'm going to ask you a bit of a loaded question here. If you had the ability to sort of snap and take out religion tomorrow, would you do it? Like, maybe a different way to ask this question is, do you think, I'm going to keep it down to America, is ready to have religion sort of pulled out from underneath it? Like, do you think we could survive as a completely secular nation?
Well, that is a very loaded question, because my take on the whole thing is that religion is very useful, especially for children. As you're growing up, you're learning sort of like right and wrong through all these biblical characters and things. The thing that I don't understand is as you grow up, and yeah, that's a great example though, actually, right? But as you grow up and you start to get real world experience, you can almost get rid of those. Like,
shed.
You know what's worked and hasn't worked in the real world. Yeah, shed, that's actually a pretty good word. Of like, yeah, I was nice to people because, Jesus told me so, and it actually worked out, and I got further doing that. So as an adult, your brain now would be like, well, I should keep doing that because it worked out and it's kind of just better for the community and everybody. So yeah, like I see getting rid of it more in that sense of like you shed it as an adult, but it's still certainly useful for like children and, just sort of like overall guidelines of how to behave. My problem is when there's like all these really, really specific rules, then like I would throw all of those out. But if I were to make a religion, I would pay a lot more attention into like like honor. Like we need to understand what honor is and do that. Or like, be nice, or, treat others as you would treat yourself. I would certainly not throw that a rule away, but my religion would just like take that as a core teaching and not have very specific, don't do that one thing. Don't eat pork is like way too specific of a rule, right? Like what does that have to do with virtue and honor and the types of things that my religion would hold up as cornerstones?
Well, yeah, and I have a little bit of a theory here around the reason that things like that exist is because when you sort of put in evolution or natural selection, if you had a version of Judaism that said eat pork and then a version of Judaism that said don't eat pork, and then you have something like the Black Plague, right, or insert pork-related disease here, the group of people that will survive is the one that doesn't eat pork. So naturally, ideas through natural selection sort of move down the line, and we're left with the kind of package that we do have. Now, granted, I can't, when you point to one of like, well, explain to me why two different cloths can't, be of a different type, right? I have no idea the natural selection evolutionary advantage of that. But a lot of the other ones that seem sort of puzzling now, I think exist because of some type of natural selection advantage.
Yeah, I don't think you're wrong, but why can't we update them? Like in 2021, what's the advantage? Short of like tradition, which I guess is really the best argument. But to throw out a whole, like to call somebody not religious or like not a real Jew because they ate pork, that seems wild to me. What if they believe everything? Like that's where I have problems.
Well, and this is
the most
why
arbitrary rule versus like, practicing sort of the other, teachings of how to actually behave towards other people and all that type of stuff. To me, those are so much more important that I would like to go back to your original question. If I could get rid of half of religions, that would be, I think, beneficial actually to everybody. Personally, that's how I think.
Get rid of half?
Yeah, like take a look at the rule book. You're going to
put on the Thanos glove and just see what happens to religion?
Yes, that's exactly right. I would take a look at the rule book, and we can easily be like, well, who am I to decide what's right or wrong?
Right.
I would get rid of all of those types of arbitrary, these don't seem to really matter in today's day and age, and get rid of that and keep things like teachings about how to actually behave towards other people. You know what I'm saying? Like I said, be honest and have honor and all that type of stuff. Like I would pick those words out and be like, that's what you need to teach, these 8 cornerstone words or whatever, and we can unpack those. But I don't care if you're eating pork or, I don't care if you're using birth control or anything like that. Like that has nothing to do with like a relationship with any sort of God, in my opinion. So like that can just be sliced out.
Yeah, but I would imagine don't believe in revelation. And so thus it's very easy for you to jump over these things versus the idea that a divine creator sort of penned them.
Well, yeah, right. Because my religion too, if I were to make one, wouldn't have like a single man or woman at the top. It would just be like a collection of ideas that we should pay attention to. And like worship is a strong word, but if you were to sort of semi like worship honor and honesty and doing good unto others and all that kind of like, that's where my religion would go, and not like a single deity that we bow down to. Or fear, in the other sense of it.
You're almost like worshiping ideas?
Yeah, like virtues or principles, which is lacking in today's world, especially in things like politics. Have a set of principles, and like that's what we focus on in and out, and how to live by those principles.
What if we took those 10 principles and put them on a tablet? And then
but actually though, yeah, that would be better though, because it would just be 10 words and not like don't do this thing.
Oh man, though you're hiding behind a little bit of a curtain though, because like then you introduce the like let's say that one of your principles should be integrity or justice, right? I mean, those are loaded, I mean, wonderful words to unpack, and people spend years of their life unpacking them, right? I mean, that's a large journey. Principles themselves can be unpacked in such
and here's the difference with my religion. I would encourage that, because if we need to update our feelings about it, then let's do that. But let's not beat each other's throats about it. Let's try and understand like what makes the most sense, being objective as we can.
Yeah. And I get mixed messages from people in faiths where some of them talk about how, like, oh, please, like the church invites, the sparring of ideas and that. And it's like, okay, well, that's cool. And then other ones I talk to, sometimes in the same faith, I kind of hear a story of like, well, you just got to have faith, or like, you're not supposed to question it. And I'm like, first off, I'm getting mixed messages as to what your belief system invites. And second off, the alarm bells go off in my head whenever there's a belief system that a fundamental tenet of the belief system is don't question the belief system.
Oh, 100%. Now you're getting culty. 100%.
Yeah.
There's
the old...
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
I'm gonna spin this off to a different question. So.
Well, cult plus time equals religion is all I was gonna say.
Oh, yeah. Right. Cults that have survived become religions. So.
Right, and I was actually just reading an article that said the kind of quasi line in the sand is 100 years. If a cult can withstand 100 years, it starts reaching religion territory. Like, because we all sort of agree now that Mormonism is a religion, but for a while it was just a cult, right, of people following Joseph Smith.
That's true. All right, so in this similar vein, this is actually a nice little segue into the one question I brought to ask you. I came prepared. And this is also based off something that we had started to talk about while you were here and then you had to go. But we were talking about how the Bible, or really any of the religious texts, are stuck in written form. And why not, in a modern time, have like a collection of videos or movies, or, like if I'll just use Jesus as another example. If he had come today, like, we probably would make movies about him, right? And not write books. So my question to you was, if you were to form a video Bible, which is just a collection of stories like the Old Testament, what movies or short films would you pluck to flush out your video Bible? Is there anything that comes to mind immediately? Because it really should be about like morals and, good lessons and things like that. And there's plenty of movies out there with those things. And I'm wondering if anything comes to mind.
The first thing that came to my mind, this is a cool hypothetical exercise, is, and this part of the reason it comes to mind is because of the meaning behind it. The other part is because it's like kind of, I don't want to say convoluted, but like a very deep message you have to unpack. Like the Bible is, have you ever seen Spike Lee's Do the Right Thing?
No, I have not.
So it's a story basically about race in New York City, and that's the first thing that came to mind, was sort of something that you can watch, and then there's a good message there, and the more you think on it and unpacked, more meaning comes out of it.
That's a perfect example.
What you want in a piece, that people don't just are like, okay, got it. You want something, hopefully, that people can, well, if you give something that people can grapple with and constantly find new meaning, then you're going to have a bunch of schisms and people can debate all of these things, which is what happens in religion. But you want something that isn't just like, surface, bam, cut, print, take it home. Because then I don't think then people sort of maybe have one conversation and just move on, right? There's no good dialogue there.
That's true. Something called Do the Right Thing would certainly fit into the religion, my fictitious religion I've been laying out. Because, that's like the messaging you want. And you want to end and be like, oh, okay, I understand the lesson, and that makes a whole lot of sense. Hopefully it works out for them in the movie, or is like a clear example that you should do the right thing. And so you can walk away from that being like, oh, great. Okay. Yeah, I should try that. And I think that's the idea.
Well, yeah. Not really a spoiler here, but actually, no. Like, there isn't an example of like this amazing do the right thing moment. It's very nuanced, and sort of you have to have lots of conversations about it, which is why I think is a little bit where my mind went to it.
Does it present
it's not like
opportunities to make decisions?
It an action happens where you can almost see both sides of it, of like, okay, well, did the main character do this thing to avoid escalation of conflict, or did they do this thing because they were angry? Right?
I see.
It's like it's you start to see the shades of gray in what it means to do the right thing.
That movie should not be in the Bible.
It's not a like. Well, so when I think about who is a character that is like the perfect character, like who do we, if we have a 1 to 10 goodness scale, like who is 10 that we sort of orientate the scale around? I think of Atticus Finch from To Kill a Mockingbird.
Okay,
as
see, and
the
that
10 of goodness.
That popped into my mind right away as well. To Kill a Mockingbird should certainly be like in my modern day Bible. I do agree with that. Not 50
When's the
Shades
last
of
time
Grey.
you read that book?
Oh, grade school, 7th or 8th grade.
Yeah, I it's a little bit of a shame that I've only read it in 8th grade because I definitely didn't appreciate it.
That's probably true. See, my mind too went to, if I were to
I remember
form
being
this
slightly annoyed.
video Bible, there's like a lot of Disney movies that you could pluck from too and get lessons and things from, which I think is great. And that
Zero to Hero,
makes a lot of
just
sense.
like that. Hercules.
See, and Hercules is actually funny because it's a story about a completely different religion that you're now adding to your like
Right,
Bible
mythology.
Yeah, or like the Lion King, I think is a really good one. For some reason, that one pops into my head. There's kind of a lot to that one about growing up, and it's not quite fulfilling your destiny, but like knowing what you have to do and what's right and going and doing it, those types of things.
Moral of the story: don't trust anyone with the name Scar.
Yeah. You know the literal translations, right?
No.
Of Scar. Oh, so in the original story, the like Swahili names, I believe, I could be totally wrong, but the translations of the names, Mufasa is like king, Simba I think is lion, and then whatever Scar's actual name is like garbage. So if you were to like read a translation of the story, you'd be like, well, obviously he's the bad guy, and rightfully so. His parents named him garbage. Yeah, he's trash.
Well, isn't Vader like German for father or something like that too?
I believe.
The
Yeah,
Star
I've heard
Wars.
that. I can't validate that point, but we can have
We need a
Felix on the
fact checker on this podcast. That's true. Yeah.
Well, here we are at
What, do you
48
have other ones?
minutes.
Other quick adds to your video Bible?
Oh, it's funny that you hit on To Kill Mockingbirds because that one, and for some reason, Lion King stands out as being a very impressionable movie. Nothing immediately comes to mind. I'm sure I could do some homework and come next time with a list.
Good deal. Hey, one other thing I wanted, this is just sort of a jokey as we reach close to our
Please.
time here and wrap up. I think it's comical how, I don't know, what I have a general sense of what your views are on social media, if they're similar to mine, which is like we're both not big fans of it, which is funny when you start making something like this, how all of a sudden you see social media completely differently as an outlet for pushing out things to multiple people.
Totally
Which
true.
I still have conflicted views on, but I'm just personally I'm not a huge social media fan, and maybe a future topic it'd be fun to unpack. I'd have to reflect on like where that mindset came into my life. Like, is there a piece of art or something like that I consumed that then started switching my view, or was I just unhappy with the amount of time I spent on it? Of like, what is the fall of social media in my mind? Like, where did that come from, or your mind? That'd be interesting.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think a turning point has already been discussed in some documentaries and things of where like when it became more about monetization and stuff. Because I can remember, like when I was in college, Facebook was just a website, and like literally it was nothing more.
Oh, it wasn't.
They weren't even necessarily at that point. Maybe they were, but it didn't come across. They weren't trying to like compete for your eyeballs.
Steal your data.
or your data, and they probably were actually, now that I think about this, but like it was much less of a we need people on our website. It was more just like, here's our website, take it or leave it, because that's just what products were 10 years ago. And now they're competing for your attention, and that's turned social media into a firestorm, I think, where they'll do anything to get your attention and then track what gets your attention and then feed that back to you more. Because that wasn't happening on Facebook 10 years ago. Like you would just keep in touch with your friends.
Yeah, now it's like a digital casino, or
that's a
psychological.
But you do bring up a good point where I'm not a huge fan of it. But when you have things like this, there is no better way to push it out to the masses. Especially, I was thinking about how even 20 years ago, if you had an idea for a TV show, there was no other way. Your choices were to go like pitch a network and get it filmed or picked up or whatever, or you shoot the whole thing on like a camcorder and then sell it at a fair, like actual physical copies of it. And now this is like YouTube. You could make a TV show right now. There's no barrier to entry other than like the equipment, which is awesome. But the problem is,
don't stop.
What? Oh, okay.
Well, I was just gonna say, why make a television show? You could just go straight to streaming platform. That seems to be what everyone's doing. Make your own streaming platform.
But that's kind of what I'm saying. Like that is a TV show in today's vernacular, I guess. But yeah, something to be consumed, which is where I was going with that statement of like, I've started looking at myself as just a consumer, and that starts to get really ugly for me. And go, why am I even on Facebook if all I'm doing is consuming? Like, I'm not even pushing anything back out into the world. I'm not creating. And so then it starts to even get worse for my brain to be like, all you're doing is just like shoveling garbage into you. And you're not even putting anything back else out there. So this is kind of a fun way to turn the table a little bit and go, you know what? Even if I'm going to consume other people's things, at least I'm putting something back out there that can be then consumed.
Yeah. Well, you are what you consume, right? If it's junk food in, junk food out, sort of digitally. And I think that's why it's always good to try and build good digital habits, I'm going to call it.
I think that's a good way to phrase it, because that's become very apparent over the past, 2 or 3 years.
Especially with the pandemic, yeah, quarantine.
Especially with the pandemic and sort of a heightened political year, which actually you could blame some of that on the pandemic as well, I think. But yeah. All right.
Indeed.
Let's let's wrap this. So this has been, I'm going to call it episode 0, a little bit of a test and a little bit of a talk through, but we'll save this and then put it out there probably after a couple more. So yeah, if anyone is listening, thank you for listening.
Thanks for listening.